Let us now examine item 8.c, examination of the reports of state parties on the current status of elements inscribed on the list of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding. Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours to present this item to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And now we come to the task of the committee to examine 12 reports submitted by states parties on elements inscribed on the urgent safeguarding list. Once again, we'll provide a summary of these. You are to provide a summary of these reports to the General Assembly. The table in paragraph 6 shows the list of the 12 reports that the committee will examine during this session. The table in paragraph 5 shows the 3 reports that were expected in 2015 and 2016, but not yet submitted for examination by the committee. However, Mauritania has already submitted its overdue report in August of this year. The committee will examine that report in 2018, hopefully together with those from Brazil, that is 2 years late, and from Kyrgyzstan, that is 1 year late. The draft overall at the end of the introduction to the draft overall decision at the end of the introduction, it is proposed to once again encourage states to prioritize the submission of reports over new nominations in the sense of the intervention just made by Hungary perhaps, and to acknowledge the progress done so far and to submit the reports to the General Assembly. The document includes assessment of the 12 reports. As customary, the Secretariat has summarized the reports on the effectiveness of the safeguarding activities, the participation of communities in implementing the safeguarding plans, and in the reporting process, as well as the viability of and current risks for the inscribed element. A draft decision for each of the 12 reports is proposed for attention of the committee. I'd like to point out again, thanks to the generous voluntary contribution from the Republic of Korea, which was approved by the committee last year, it will be possible to submit online to submit the periodic reports online on the status of elements inscribed on the urgent safeguarding list from 2018 onwards. This online form is already available through the Convention's website on an experimental and voluntary basis. For those states having to submit their USL report by 15th of December 2017. To this date, China and Vietnam have volunteered to use this online tool. May I take a minute to show you on the screen how the tool looks like, very briefly, based on the case of Vietnam, which should submit a USL report by 15th of December this year on Chatru singing, and I apologize for any pronunciation mistakes. Vietnam has already submitted a first report in 2014, and it will thus be the second reporting exercise on the element. And very briefly, if you look on the screen, the heading refers to the contact designated by the reporting state, the deadline, the progress status, and links to download the current report, as well as the previous ones. So the system offers a useful feature when completing a report. You can check the past information field by field. So in B1, social and cultural functions, it's possible to consult what had been submitted in 2014 by clicking on the database icon while elaborating the new text. So you can see the relationship between what you're writing and the previous reports. Also, the Secretariat has live access to ongoing reporting, and if it need be, can provide technical assistance during the exercise to reporting states and before the final deadline. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think we can now move on to 12 reports that we have to examine. The first one was submitted by Botswana on earthenware pottery making skills in Botswana's Kgatleng district. Mr. Secretary, could you please briefly introduce the report and the corresponding draft decision?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All the draft decisions presented for the 12 reports follow the similar structure, a few standard paragraphs as well as specific ones to address the needs, welcome the achievements and underline the challenges for each inscribed element. The last paragraph is always about the next submission deadline. The report submitted by Botswana is about an element inscribed in 2012 on earthenware pottery making practice among the Bakatla Bagafela community, and I do apologize again for any pronunciation mistakes, in southeastern Botswana. Paragraph 4 of the draft decision proposes to take note of its continued efforts in safeguarding this element inscribed in 2012, and in particular through its support in forming a visual arts association, research and documentation on knowledge bearers, and funding opportunities for apprentices. Paragraph 5 encourages the state to address the current threats by encouraging master potters to participate in the competitions, enhancing their presence in formal education, training younger women, and establishing a district pottery making academy for research, documentation, and transmission. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Tinkertis. Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c. as shown on the screens? Unless you wish to propose amendments to this draft decision, may I suggest that we adopt it as a whole? Seeing no objections, I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.1 adopted. Botswana, the floor is yours to share with us your experience in preparing this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, for giving Botswana an opportunity to receive the decision taken on the report submitted on the current status of the element inscribed on the ICH list of the earthenware pottery making skills of the Bakatla Bakafela on the list. Botswana would like to thank the committee for the positive feedback on its first ever report on the listed element. We would like to thank the Secretariat for providing guidance and support during the preparation of the report. The process enhanced commitment of stakeholders in the implementation of this inscribed element, as well as an opportunity to come up with more meaningful ways of safeguarding the element. Mr. Chairperson, the inscription has helped in the visibility and the promotion of the element. This has also created economic opportunities for the practitioners in different arts and culture activities. 2 apprentices have now graduated to a status of master potters. The master potters have been involved in different transmission efforts for both students and out-of-school trainees. Recently, 17 young people were trained on the element by 4 master potters as part of the transmission through a project funded by the ACH Fund in 2016. Mr. Chairperson, the implementation of the safeguarding plan resulted in one of the master potters getting a mentorship award in the visual arts category of the 2017 annual President's Day national competitions. This was further followed by the master potters, 2 master potters receiving presidential awards for services benefiting Botswana during the Botswana Independence Day on the 30th of September 2017. This, Mr. Chairperson, has enhanced the visibility of the convention and UNESCO in Botswana. I thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Botswana. We now move on to the next report, which is the first one of 7 submitted by the People's Republic of China. This one is on the element Qiang New Year Festival. Mr. Secretary, could you please briefly introduce the report as well as the corresponding draft decision to the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. The Qiang New Year Festival is a traditional gathering of the Qiang people who live in 4 counties of Sichuan province of China and provides them with an opportunity to offer thanks and worship to the gods of heaven for their blessings and prosperity. Paragraph 4 of the draft decision is to acknowledge the safeguarding efforts undertaken by China, in particular by supporting representative bearers of the festival in all areas, as well as by rebuilding the training center for this element to improve the mechanism for its transmission. Paragraph 5 is to invite the states to continue its support for bearers, introduce teaching of the element components onto schools and textbooks, and foster the safeguarding network that has been built among multiple participants. Finally, the committee may wish to encourage the state to strengthen intergenerational transmission, which is affected by the advanced age of most of the bearers, and that is proposed in paragraph 6. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.2 as shown on the screens? Also, in this case, I'd like to suggest that we adopt this draft decision as a whole. Do you agree? I see no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.2 adopted. We can move on to the third report, also in this case submitted by the People's Republic of China on the status of traditional design and the practices for building Chinese wooden arch bridges. Mr. Secretary, you have the floor to present the report and the corresponding draft decision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. This element was inscribed in 2009, and in paragraph 4 of the draft decision, it is proposed that the committee acknowledges the continued efforts of China to safeguard the element, especially through establishing training and practice centers for woodworkers, documenting the element, and undertaking the maintenance and restoration of wooden bridges. In paragraph 5, the committee may wish to invite the reporting state to encourage bearers to participate in exhibition and exchange activities, support the transmission of related knowledge, and promote the element through documentary films. Finally, the state might be encouraged to pay particular attention to the remaining challenges which still undermine transmission, as proposed in paragraph 6. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Can we see a draft decision on the screens? Once again, if you agree, I'd like to propose the adoption of these draft decisions as a whole. Do you have any objections? I see none. Therefore, I declare decision 12.com 8.c.3 adopted. We now move on to the fourth report to be examined in the current cycle, again submitted by the People's Republic of China, namely on the element traditional lead textile techniques, spinning, dyeing, weaving, and embroidering. Mr. Secretary, could you please briefly introduce?
Paragraph 4 of the draft decision proposes to take note of the efforts of China in safeguarding this element inscribed in 2009, in particular by ensuring that the specific techniques of the element are effectively transmitted and seeking solutions for the difficulty faced by bearers. In paragraph 5, the state is invited to continue its support for bearers who transmit the techniques of the element, the provision of regular courses for Li women on all the textile techniques in the training centers, and the integration of the element into the school education system. Finally, the committee may wish to encourage the state to continue to strive towards the safeguarding of this element and explore the possibilities offered by other funding sources such as local associations, non-governmental organizations, in order to implement further safeguarding measures and strengthen the element's viability as suggested in paragraph 6. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c4 as shown on the screens? Can we adopt this draft decision as a whole? I see no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.4 adopted. Thank you. We now proceed to the fifth report for this cycle, the first submitted by China on the element MSREP. Mr. Secretary, could you briefly introduce the report and draft the decision to us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This element was inscribed in 2010. In paragraph 4 of the draft decision, the committee may wish to take note of the safeguarding activities implemented so far by China that include, among others, the training of young people by experienced bearers. Paragraph 5 invites the state to further develop the regulatory and policy frameworks for inventorying and create favorable conditions for bearers to take on apprentices and participate in demonstration and exchange activities. Finally, in paragraph 6, it is proposed that the committee encourages the state to effectively address the problems resulting from the fast transformation of the communities in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region from a traditional agricultural society to a modern industrial one, taking into account that there is also an urgent need to maintain and preserve a social environment favorable to the element. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.5 as shown on the screens? As usual, can I request the committee to adopt this draft decision as a whole like the previous ones? Any objections? I can see none. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.5 adopted. We now move on to the sixth report to be examined by this committee under this item, the fifth from China on the element watertight bulkhead technology of Chinese junks. Mr. Secretary, please brief introduction of draft decision and the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paragraph 4 of the draft decision is to acknowledge again the efforts undertaken by the reporting state to achieve 3 broad objectives: safeguarding the bearers and the modes of transmission, improving the visibility and awareness of the element, and addressing a number of challenges faced by the element and its bearers. In paragraph 5, it is suggested that the committee encourage the state to continue safeguarding modes of transmission, including in vocational schools, and by providing bearers with financial and social support. Finally, the committee may wish to encourage the state to carry on its awareness-raising activities and to further develop formal vocational and extracurricular education on the element and its traditional knowledge. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.6 as shown on the screens? May I suggest that we adopt again this draft decision as a whole? I can see no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.6 adopted. Let us now move on to the seventh report that we have to examine. The sixth submitted by the People's Republic of China on wooden movable type printing of China. Mr. Secretary, could you briefly introduce?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Paragraph 4 of the draft decision proposes to take note of its continued efforts in safeguarding this element, which was inscribed in 2010, and in particular through the establishment of an archive for audiovisual material and the adoption of institutional support and funds for the bearers and practitioners. Paragraph 5 invites the state to further recognize the essential role of the bearers in the transmission and to facilitate the transmission by apprenticeship and by incorporating teaching bases for the element into school programs. Finally, in paragraph 6, the committee may wish to encourage the state to seek new patterns to diversify the fundraising channels in order to implement additional safeguarding measures and to explore new methods for the promotion of the element. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. Can we now move to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.7 as shown on the screens? May I suggest that we adopt it as a whole, just like the previous ones? Seeing no objections, I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.7 adopted. We now move on to the 8th report and the last one submitted by the People's Republic of China on the element Hessian Yemakan storytelling. Mr. Secretary, could you please briefly introduce the report as well as the corresponding draft decision to the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Paragraph 4 of the draft decision is to acknowledge China's safeguarding efforts aimed at ensuring community-based capacity building and promoting the Hessian language and culture. Paragraph 5 invites the state to continue recognizing training practitioners and providing financial aid to them, and to strengthen the network of practice centers established in the Hessian communities. Finally, in paragraph 6, the committee may wish to encourage the state to continue its systematic digital documentation of the element and to include the element in formal and non-formal education.
Thank you. Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.8 as shown on the screens? Just like the previous one, I'd like to adopt the decision, draft decision as a whole. Do you agree? I can see no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.8 adopted. We can move on to the 9th report, the first of the 2 submitted by Indonesia on the status of Saman dance. Mr. Secretary, you have the floor to present the report and the corresponding draft decision.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Saman dance is a form of entertainment with aesthetic value, but which also has an important meaning for the people of Gayo Lues and serves as a tool of communication and friendship building between villages. Paragraph 4 of the draft decision proposes that the committee acknowledge the efforts undertaken by Indonesia to safeguard this element, especially through strengthening modes of transmission, both in the family and through the training of trainers, and facilitating Saman performance by opening a cultural space. Furthermore, the committee may wish to invite the reporting state to continue officially certifying Sanggar, traditional arts training centers in Saman areas, including privately managed ones, among other activities included in paragraph 5. Finally, as proposed in paragraph 6, the state might be encouraged to continue supporting the transmission of Saman-related knowledge and strengthening customary institutions related to the element, and to complete the construction of a Gayo Art and Culture Center. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.9 as shown on the screens? Once again, if you agree, I'd like to propose the adoption of these draft decisions as a whole. Seeing no objections, therefore, I declare decision 12.com 8.c.9 adopted. I will kindly ask Indonesia to take the floor after we finish the examination of their second report. We move on to the 10th report to be examined in the current cycle, namely the second submitted by Indonesia. This one on the element Noken multifunctional knotted and oven bag handcraft of the people of Papua. Mr. Tim Curtis, could you please briefly introduce the report and draft decision?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In paragraph 4 of the draft decision, it is proposed to take note of the efforts of Indonesia for safeguarding this element, which was inscribed in 2012. In particular, in providing guidance and assistance to craftspeople, including Noken, in educational programs and ensuring that natural raw materials are available. In paragraph 5, the state is invited to continue inventorying the element to roll this out to a wider geographical area to train Noken communities in data collection methods and further build the capacities of Papuan craftspeople. Finally, as proposed in paragraph 6, the committee may wish to encourage the state to promote Noken through exhibitions and festivals, support craftspeople to showcase their Noken crafts, bearing in mind the possible negative impacts that over-commercialization can have on the element's social and cultural functions and meanings. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Let's move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.10 as shown on the screens. Just like the previous one, I'd like to adopt this draft decision as a whole. Do you agree? I see no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.10 adopted. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Indonesia. The floor is yours to share with us your experience in preparing these reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indonesia has read the report and the draft decision on Saman as well as for Noken, Papua. We would like to thank you for your acknowledgement on the continued efforts undertaken by Indonesia to safeguard the elements. We also take note on your suggestion to continue officially certifying Sanggar or the traditional art training center in Saman areas, and we will continue to further safeguarding the element by supporting the transmission and the promotion of Saman-related knowledge. We will report to the Secretariat as requested, both on Saman and Noken, Papua. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Fauzi Suleiman, Ambassador, and I recognize also Ambassador Hammangaraja, and thank you so much for your honorable presence together with us. We now proceed to the 11th report that has been submitted by Peru on the element Esuba Harakambut Sung Prayers of Perus Huachipare people. Mr. Tim Curtis, could you briefly introduce the report and the corresponding draft decisions to us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This element is a traditional expression native to the Paucatambo province in Cusco, Peru, and its main purpose is healing diseases by invoking the spirits of plants and animals. In the draft decision, it is proposed that the committee take note of the continued efforts of Peru to safeguard this element through the registration, inventorying, and promotion of Eshuva songs, as well as the revitalization of the Wachipari language. It is also proposed that the committee welcome the involvement of the community concerned in the identification and implementation of the safeguarding measures. Paragraph 6 encourages the state to continue to work with and support the Wachipari communities and their representative associations by allocating appropriate financial resources to this end. Finally, in paragraph 7, it is proposed that the committee invites the state to strengthen its efforts to revitalize the Wachipari language and its transmission to young generations, in particular by providing intercultural exchange spaces for children so that it contributes to combating ethnic tensions that distance young people in the native communities from their mother tongue. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Can we move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.11 as shown on the screens? As customary, I'd like to adopt draft decision as a whole if you don't have any objections. Seeing no objection, I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.11 adopted. The floor is yours to share with the committee your experience in preparing the report we just examined. Paru, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since it's the first time that Peru takes the floor, we want to congratulate you for the excellent job that you are making. And we want to thank the Republic of Korea for its hospitality. The experience of making this report was very important to Peru, not only at local level, but at national level too, because the process allowed to us to reflect about the threats that an element that are much dynamic as the element itself. So we need to create new measures to contribute the safeguarding of the element and the whole Wachipari culture too. Every year, we have to change that kind of measures. In the case of the Eshuva, we see that the reinforcement of the mother tongue was mandatory to safeguard the Eshuva and the whole Wachipari people. So to Peru was necessary to make interinstitutional alliance to ensure the necessary resources for the safeguarding. We want to thank the Secretary for the working in evaluation of the report, and we are taking note of these recommendations. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Paru. We now move on to the last report to be examined by the committee under this item, namely the report submitted by Uganda on the element Bigwala gold trumpet music and dance of the Busoga Kingdom in Uganda. I'd like to invite Mr. Tinkatis to introduce last report for this cycle as well as the draft decision specifically related to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Inscribed in 2012, the Bigwala God Trumpets Music and Dance of the Busoga Kingdom in Uganda is performed at the Busoga King's coronation and its annual anniversaries. According to the report, the number of living practitioners is very low and young people rarely practice the element. However, its viability seems to be more reassured now by the new generation of youth who have benefited from the implementation of the safeguarding plan. Paragraph 4 of the draft decision is to acknowledge the efforts undertaken by Uganda to raise awareness of this element, increase the number of proficient players through training and promotional actions, and develop better documentation of the element. Furthermore, it is suggested that the committee invite the state to continue encouraging communities to grow gourds and ensure their supply to teach young people to make Bigwala instruments and transmit knowledge about how to play and dance Bigwala as proposed in paragraph 5. Finally, in paragraph 6, the committee may wish to encourage the state to follow its proposed future safeguarding commitments to improve the proficiency of youth in Bigwala, increase its repertoire, and prepare Bigwala educational resources for music teachers. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Let's move now to the adoption of decision 12.com 8.c.12 as shown on the screens. May I suggest that we adopt again the draft decision as a whole? I can see no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c.12 adopted. Uganda, do you wish to take a floor? Where is the delegation of Uganda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Uganda would like to thank the Secretariat for supporting the Bigwara element with the international assistance, which helped the young people to learn about Bigwara. Uganda will continue to work to ensure that the teachers and the students in schools promote Bigwara. I thank you.
Thank you, Uganda. Dear colleagues, I think that we are ready to move now to the chapeau decision of this item. Please refer to the draft decision in para 8. Can we see it on screen? May I ask the committee to adopt draft decision 12.com 8.c as shown on the screens? Let us proceed para by para. Para 1, citing the document we have examined. Do I see any objections? No. Adopted. Para 2, recalling the references to the Convention and the operational directives. Any objections? No. Adopted. Para 3, in which we invite states that have not yet submitted their report to do so at the earliest opportunity. Are there any objections? None. Adopted. Para 4, to acknowledge the improving rate of submission of these reports. I see no objections. Adopted. Para 5, to recognize the overall achievements of reporting states so far and to encourage them to fully involve the communities in the safeguarding of inscribed elements and the reporting on their status. Are there any objections? No. Adopted. Para 6, to submit a summary of these reports as our own report to the General Assembly. Are there any objections? I see none. Adopted. We have now adopted each of the paras, and we need to adopt the decision as a whole. I'm sure there must be no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com 8.c adopted. Please, ladies and gentlemen, before you leave the room, I'd like to give the floor to the Secretary for a few practical announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to remind you that there are some activities taking place during our lunch break, including the Roundtable on Intangible Cultural Heritage and Tertiary Education in this room, the regional working groups of the ICH NGO Forum, the Mongolian National Instrument performance. Again, information is on the TV screen outside the room. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have to adjourn the morning meeting, but before adjourning, we are meeting again promptly at 2:30 p.m. sharp. Please make sure you are on time. We will get back to the item 7 that we couldn't finish during our morning meeting. The room will remain open during lunchtime. Please don't leave any of your personal belongings. This one should be announced by Secretariat. Anyway, I declare the morning meeting adjourned.